My name is Susan Holtzman. I am the Older Adult and Special Needs Advocate for the Office of Mayor for Miami-Dade County, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. Just a few notes at the beginning. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation. Please enter your questions for our presenters in the chat box. This session is also closed captioning enabled. Please click on the closed caption button in your Zoom toolbar and choose the option to show the live transcript. Additionally, for those who are visually impaired, the session is compatible with NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver, and Android TalkBack screen readers. And I'm happy to introduce our speakers today. We have Kevin Walford, Transportation Planner 3 with the Miami-Dade TPO. Kevin has over 24 years of experience in the planning field, the last 15 of which have been in transportation. His responsibilities at the Miami-Dade TPO are freight transportation, non-motorized transportation, and performance management. Mr. Walford has a bachelor's degree in geography from the University of Miami and a master's of urban and regional planning degree from Florida Atlantic University. Sorry, I have to move the poll. There we go. And I'd like to introduce Benazir Portal, Senior Engineer with Kittelson and Associates. Benazir is a professional engineer and certified road safety professional and has participated in a variety of traffic operations, planning and safety engineering studies throughout the United States. Her experience includes the development of transit signal priority, traffic operations analysis, road safety audits, identification of safety and operational improvements, signing and paving improvements, transportation impact studies, and parking studies. Benazir has further developed her traffic operations analysis skills using microsimulation for different projects, including the operations evaluation for highly urbanized locations like downtown Miami and environmental assessment documentation for the Washington, D.C. streetcar line. Benazir supported the Florida Department of Transportation's central office with the update and development of several guidelines, including the 2016 and 2021 Manual of Uniform Traffic Studies and associated analysis tools, the Highway Safety Improvement Program Manual, and the Intersection Control Evaluation Manual, and corresponding statewide trainings. Benazir is currently managing the review of the new FHWA MUTCD 11th edition released on December 14th, 2020 on behalf of the FDOT Central Office. The review is focused on identifying fatal flaws or major changes regarding a significant safety, mobility, or financial impact to Florida. In addition to the FDOT review comments coordination, Benazir is supporting FDOT's Central Office staff to manage review comments and coordinate with the AASHTO Committee on Traffic Engineering on the proposed standard changes and additions. So with that, our presentation.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Kevin Walford from the Miami-Dade TPO. Glad you could join us here this afternoon and for the conference as a whole. Both Benazir and I are going to be doing this in shifts. So I'll be doing the first part, and then she'll take over in the second section. So what you see on the screen here is a picture of what we nicely call abuela. Everybody's grandma. Everybody loves their grandma. So this lady is crossing on Southwest 7th Street in Miami, which is a westbound one-way street coming from downtown. And as you can see, she is crossing right into traffic. This is not a stage photo. This is something we actually witnessed when we were there doing our road safety audit back in 2019. So we tend to use this picture a lot because, like I said, everybody loves abuela. Next slide. All right, so the TPO had transportation initiatives over the past 5 years or so, one of which is our Vision Zero plan, which we did in 2018. And the goal of that is to eliminate all traffic-related deaths by serious injuries, by serious injuries by the year 2030. Next one, Benazir. And then in 2017, we also did our Aging Road Users Strategic Safety Plan. And with that one, that was basically, as you see on the screen, called to improve the safety and mobility of aging road users. And that with the aging road users and the Vision Zero is how we came about to do the road safety audit. And the other next one you see there is a complete streets design guidelines, which was in 2014, and it's going to be updated within the next year or so. For this particular slides, we're going to be presentation will be concentrating on the Vision Zero and the aging road users. Go ahead to the next slide. So our Vision Zero plan that you see a couple of heat maps of Miami-Dade County on the left hand of your screen, showing where there was a high concentration of crash locations. That main red spine down the middle is where, for those who are not familiar with I-90, familiar with Miami-Dade County, that's I-95, but there's also a major road next to it, State Road 7. So you can see that's where the majority of crashes are. Of course, those are on interstate highways, whereas other ones you have on surface streets. Go ahead to the next slide. In the aging road users strategic service, safety plan, as I mentioned, this was to identify high crash locations around where our seniors were. You can see the rate of the crashes between ages 65 and up for male and female, and on a map showing the locations of the high concentrations of those crashes involving elderly residents. And as you can see, Florida leads the nation with over 90% over the population over age 65, and that will only increase even more. Now, within that map, in the center is where we got our information for the next stage. Go to the next slide, please. Keep going. All right, so 10% of all crashes in Miami-Dade County between that 5-year period occurred within a quarter mile of elderly living centers, which is very concerning. And how were those locations selected? So on that map that you saw before, there were 140 older adult residential living centers that were reviewed. We used a quarter mile radius using as a study area. And then we went even further, doing the total number of crashes and the number of crashes involving 65 or older. And from that, we came up with a number of a top 5 in which to use. The next slide. Go ahead. So these locations were located different areas through Miami-Dade County. So what we did to start with for the road safety audit, we assembled a team of stakeholders. That being individuals from respective agencies, citizens groups, and so forth. We did the background research, which involved historical crash reviews, transit availability, and local infrastructure. As I mentioned, the public involvement. We had meetings at various residential areas, and then we also, when we went on the field, we did our review at different times of the day and so forth. So we did one during the peak hour in the morning. We did one in the evening when the light was not good, and also we did them on high volume roads and low volume roads. So it was a very well-rounded information gathering. Go to the next slide. All right. So what is a road safety audit? As you can see up there, there are four parts. One is the procedures and documentation. That's a formal section. The second one is focusing on the safety. And the third is that you have to have auditors detached from the project team, so there's no bias going into the collection of the data. And then the audit team is a multidisciplinary team. So we had individuals who were traffic engineers. You had people like myself, because both Benazir and I were on the audit team. You had individuals from the senior citizens home and so forth. So there was a well-rounded group that were out on the street doing the research. Next slide. So why do we have RSAs? You can see with this Venn diagram shows that the road environment, which would be the green oval. It takes up 27% of those. The road environment is also related to human factors, so that combination, of course, is the most deadly one as to how to make sure that the way the road is set up or exists at the time can overcome the issues of human behavior. Next slide. All right, so why do we need road essays? When a lot of times when you have crash reports, the information is gathered. If there's any information that's missing or it's not written down on the police report, that becomes a problem when you're trying to get data down the road. Road designs, they should be done so they can anticipate and accommodate road user behaviors. It should be easier to design and build safer roads and to modify some entrenched behaviors both from pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists, because we all have our own behaviors that we do, whether we know them or not. But you'll see a picture of one of those later on in the presentation. And then as with everything, there's always a negative factor to bouncing against it, one of which is always cost, and how that's going to be able to take place when you have all these other things that limit the possibilities and the availability of getting an idea done. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so on this little diagram up here, this loop of circles, you see the first step would be to identify the projects, which we did, the five locations. We selected the RSA team, as I mentioned how we did it before. And then with the ones with the purple around it is when the RSA team was involved, which we conducted the startup meeting. We performed the field reviews over a couple of days and nights. We then analyzed the reports on the findings, presented the findings, and then prepare a formal response, which was our report, and executive summary, which is on the TPO's website, and you'll have information on that later on. And then to incorporate the findings, which would be to the next step as to now that we know what these issues are, how we're now going to get them resolved. So on the screen here now you see an example of what a walking field visit was like. We broke up into groups and walked through, and we're looking at all roadway and roadside features, whether it be a broken sidewalk or a sign that's missing. There's my dog barking in the background. Hopefully that's not coming through. Observe how the road users are interacting with the road facility. Determine if the needs of the road users have been adequately, safely met. And as we go along over to the side, you'll see all the various things that we come across that would create issues. One of which I'll just point out would be at the end where we see nighttime field visit, where we came across a good many point of signs that had lost their reflectivity, which showed, and if we couldn't see them either standing next to them or with, and you can only imagine if a vehicle driving at 20, 30 miles an hour, they would not notice the sign either. Next slide. And so these two maps here, I just want to show you an example we did. This is the Joe Moretti 2 and Buena Vista Apartments. This is in Little Havana, just west of I-95. And we had team 1, which would be like in the green. They went down the 2 streets you see there, which would be 7th Street, south of 7th Street, where we saw a boiler earlier. And then the other group went down Cayocho, southwest 8th Street, and also going north-south. And you see the various dots along showing where the various crashes were, crash frequencies. And then on day 2, we did it again, but now in concentrating on other thoroughfares in the area. So we made sure that the entire area within that radius got got the best attention. And as you can see, and this is going to be my last slide, but as you see the high concentration of the crashes right there on by the I-95 exit onto 7th Street, which you would figure because there's a high volume of traffic. But then if you look throughout the neighborhood area, you see some dots around crashes, which would be areas which aren't that heavily traveled, but obviously they're concerned. That's why you have a crash there. And I think, and Benazir, this is where you can take over.
All right. And one thing I wanted to highlight, and thank you, Kevin, for walking us through the whole process since we started even identifying the top tier locations to conduct the walking audits. The objectives for today's session is actually for you guys to walk away from our discussion having learned about the applications of the road safety audit process, specifically tailored around assisted living facilities. And the second objective for today's participation, we want to make sure that you gain an understanding of the type of interventions or improvements that can actually help create safer and age-friendly streets within our neighborhood. So great introduction, Kevin. Thank you for walking us through that process and also some of the initiatives that the TPO has taken on in coordination with the county to make sure that we're on the same page and we're making strides to providing safer streets. So now we're going to dive into a little bit more of the project specific analysis that we conducted for the road safety audits around assisted living facilities. And the first step that we're going to go through is a historical crash review. So as Kevin noted, the trigger or what initiated or what actually helped us narrow down which location we were going to be looking at within Miami-Dade County was the frequency of number of crashes and the frequency of crashes that associated road users of 65 years and older. So the first step we took through the project is to start taking a look at the surrounding land use and infrastructure. From our poll earlier today, we have about 60% of government staff. So this is really important to highlight for any studies that you're doing. You want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what are the surrounding land uses within your study locations. That's going to determine traffic patterns, multimodal needs, and in other aspects, for example, access to transit. And on the map, I know it's a little hard to see, but the little flags in blue, they're actually bus stops throughout our road network. In addition, you can see that, majority or the yellow is the residential, and you're also noticing where we have signalized intersections, and as well, we're highlighting which bus routes are going through our main streets. The next step that we took through the analysis process is actually to just have a visual representation or graphical representation of where the crashes are happening. The data we used was from 2014 to 2018, and we used the most up-to-date set of data available. So you can see on this map, these are all crashes plotted. I know it's a little hard to see, but you can definitely see some of the concentrations getting closer to the intersections like here, as well as a majority of, or a big concentration of crashes on the major streets or the major roadways that you're seeing intersecting here. And I forgot to mention the circles are the quarter-mile radius away from our senior assisted living facilities. Now, what is this whole story telling us, right? Why do we spend time plotting, mapping, and trying to get a visual of the map? So just to give you some background from crash statistics and crash trends in general. So we had over 1,700 crashes reported between 2014 and 18. Out of those, there was one fatality reported. Unfortunately, this fatality was associated with a road user 65 years and older, and it was a pedestrian fatality. There were also 174 injury crashes and over 1,600 property damage only crashes. From the overall data set, crash trends, it was observed that a higher frequency of crashes was reported during Friday, and specifically during the midday and PM peak hours. When we dived a little bit deeper into what the crash characteristics included, we noticed three leading crash types within the data set. So we had rear end leading the charts with 463 crashes, or 26% of the data. 304 crashes were angle, and 227 were side swipe crashes. Out of the 1,700, we also had 13 bicyclists and 32 pedestrian crashes. 21% of the crashes occurred during non-daylight conditions, and this includes nighttime with lighting, nighttime without lighting, in dusk and dawn. And 0.3% of the crashes were drug or alcohol related. A little bit more on telling why and trying to justify or helping us to strengthen the reason why it's important to conduct these types of studies. As you can see on the bottom left chart, you actually have an increasing trend on the overall number of crashes for this particular area. Reinforcing with the chart on the top right, this is basically where we were able to identify where the highest peak for crashes are happening within the data set. You see the midday hours from noon to 2 p.m., as well as from 4 to 6 p.m., kind of have the leading charts on the overall number of crashes. And last chart that we're going to talk on this slide is actually that distribution of crashes across the different crash types, how we assign those. So as I mentioned, rear end, angle, and side swipe were leading the charts. Crashes within parking lot were another leading crash type, but definitely outside that falls within a private property or private area that doesn't necessarily impact the recommendations that we had for our road network. All right, so this is a typical process that you would conduct for a safety study. But given the nature and the intent behind the road safety audits around assisted living facilities, it was really to focus on elderly road users. The way that elderly road users respond to traffic control devices, to safety measures can vary from your average or your regular road user. So we wanted to take a deeper look at what those trends look like for road users that were 65 and older. And this map basically plots the same thing that I mentioned earlier. Basically, your crash frequency and the black dots each represent a crash. But specifically, these are only related to those road users that are 65 years of older in age. I'm not gonna dive or show numbers in the same way, but we thought of a graphical way to show you some comparisons of what that elderly or what those crashes associated with elderly road users represented within the overall data set for the whole area. So like I mentioned, we had over 1,700 crashes within our circles. For the overall number of crashes, 25% of those crashes were actually associated with elderly population. When we look at injury-related crashes, actually that percentage increases to representing 29% of the overall data set for injury-related crashes. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, that fatality that was associated with a pedestrian happened to be an elderly road user. So this covers 100% of the fatalities within our area. Diving a little more and a little deeper into what the data set comparison looks like. So from the previous chart, I mentioned 25% of the overall elderly road, 25% of the crashes actually represented elderly road users. When we just look at pedestrians and pedestrian crashes specifically, that percentage or that breakup of elderly road users being involved in a pedestrian crash increases by almost half, being 47% of the overall pedestrian crashes within the data set. When we look at bicycle, as expected or anticipated, there's a lower population actually riding bicycles, so that the percentage reduces to 7%. And another insightful piece of information that we were able to gather from the data set review is that actually only 14% of the nighttime crashes actually involved road users of 65 and older. So Going into a little bit more of the process, we, as Kevin mentioned, we conducted a public involvement meeting where we met with the assisted living facility staff and residents and actually got feedback, identified some of the issues that they see on a daily basis that we may not be able to experience when conducting the walk audit. So this is a very important piece where we want to highlight and share. If you're taking something away from today's discussion, is make sure you're including your community members as part of the discussion. We got a tremendous amount of information from the residents, and just hearing what their struggles are on a daily basis provided a big difference on what we were paying attention in the field. Now we're going to go into a little bit more of put in a tangible example of what we actually found through the field review. So we're going to walk through some example issues that came out of the road safety audits. A majority of the recommendations, or actually the recommendations, were broken down into 3 tiers that are short-term or maintenance type of recommendations, mid-term, which are not anticipated to be installed immediately, but need, additional coordination or further evaluation. And then long-term, more of those recommendations where they have a higher cost ticket attached to them, and there's also a lot more coordination with agencies and just rethinking sometimes the street layout. So in this slide, we have a few examples of obstructed or damaged sidewalks and crosswalks for somebody that doesn't have any restriction or is able to go through the sidewalk. This images may not represent an issue, but for somebody that may have limited flexibility with mobility or just not have, that has limitations, being an elderly road user, being able to walk through a gravel path may not be ideal. If you're going with a wheelchair or with a cane, going through a path of grass broken into the sidewalk is not ideal. And obviously trying to avoid street signs in the middle of your sidewalk is not ideal either. So these were the type of recommendations that were made that were short-term maintenance type, to relocate obstructions and repair the sidewalks that were observed to be damaged. Some of the long-term recommendations still tied into the obstructed or damaged sidewalks and crosswalks is actually relocating major infrastructure like utility poles or signal poles where right-of-way is limited. Obtaining right-of-way for just a relocation of sign can really take a long time. And that's where we put in the realistic hat on and said, okay, well, this is something that should be fixed immediate. In reality, it's going to fall under the long-term type of recommendations. Going into the crosswalks and curb ramps issues that we observed, there was definitely several that fell within that short-term maintenance bucket, which includes repainting the crosswalk pavement markings, rebuilding some of the curb ramps, realigning some of the tactile domes that actually lead visually impaired pedestrians into the right path for the crosswalk. So we want to make sure you walk away today from some tangible examples of what to look out in the field. Within the same bucket of fixing crosswalks and curb ramps, there's also long-term recommendations where specifically for this intersection, we actually had a drainage and flooding issue. And we were thankful enough and also kind of got rained on when we were in the middle of our summer field reviews. Not ideal time, especially if you're trying to jot notes in a clipboard with actual paper. But to be honest, it gave us the opportunity to see certain issues specifically for drainage that we would not have been able to experience if it was a sunny, beautiful South Florida day. So keep an eye out, and this is where also the input from the community comes in handy. If they tell you, we're getting flooding in this area, it's impossible to go through, this is where we need support. This is a great pointer or a great aspect within the roadway elements to keep an eye out for. Reinforcing a little bit of what Kevin had mentioned regarding lighting, these are some of the recommendations that we noted and provided in the report, where we noticed some burned light bulbs that falls basically in your maintenance bucket, and it can be a quick fix or a quick adjustment with the partnering agencies. An example of what falls into near-term recommendations, there's as you progress within the area that this picture was taken is actually in the edge of a very urbanized downtown area and transitioning more into a suburban location. So there's a big gap of uniformity levels, or a big discrepancy on uniformity levels for lighting. So that's something that we need to keep an eye out when you're conducting road safety audits. All right. A few other examples that are near term that involved education and enforcement, driver behavior not yielding to pedestrians on the sidewalk, parking within bicycle lanes, or even not yielding to a disabled pedestrian in a motorized scooter going through the crosswalk, even when they do have the walk signal. So something to keep in mind as part of the recommendations and observations that we've made. Another near-term recommendation associated with pedestrian needs is to increase or improve the crosswalk delineation in the area. Here you see an elderly road user with a walker really not having any guidance on where is designated to cross. Additional pedestrian needs. This is our abuela, and you can see actually at the same location, different perspective of the intersection. A stroller being carried with a family, or being rolled over with a family, and this is a perfect candidate for evaluation of a traffic control device, whether it is a full signal, a pedestrian signal, an RFB, or whatnot. This location definitely had enough pattern to justify that type of evaluation. How we summarize the findings, as I mentioned, there's a lot of similar issues or trends that we observed through the corridor. So we broke down to area-wide recommendations or location-specific. And these numbers are just giving you a sense of what were the level of recommendations and the effort that was put forward for the 5 different senior assisted facilities that we conducted the road safety audits for. And like I mentioned, each of these recommendations were broken down into short-term, near-term, and long-term improvements. Some of examples of short-term, like I mentioned, sidewalks in the middle, signs in the middle of your sidewalk. For near-term, evaluating uniformity levels for a corridor, and long-terms, just those bigger cost ticket items that need additional coordination or additional funding that is not easily done through maintenance type of improvements. Some of the next steps as far as what were the identified issues. So the first step is to coordinate those maintenance requests submitted through the maintaining jurisdiction, whether it falls in unincorporated county, whether it falls within a specific city. The next step is also to identify projects for further evaluation or implementation. So the next step would be to submit this through the TPO's project priority list, or select or request for additional funding to be moved into the FDOT work program. And the last is to directly address any issues or concerns by the local authority. That would be the last step. Some of the lessons learned through this whole process. The makeup of the team really matters. As I mentioned, as Kevin mentioned, it was a multidisciplinary team. We were detached from the roadway design team, so there was no bias involved. And we included a multidisciplinary team that included city staff, county staff, FDOT, community involvement, and residents' input. It is important to listen to your community. So look for any of those missing pieces within your story to help bridge any of those gaps to really have a well-rounded project. For a solution to be truly context sensitive, there must be a way for everybody to be heard. So make sure you're paying attention, make sure you're reaching out to the right means of communication to get that outreach completed. And the last process is, a project does not end with a report and a shelf. It really goes through implementation, and we'll say a project has been successful once it gets to the implementation side and those measures and recommendations are actually on the ground. And last slide that I'm going to be talking, we have a few of very helpful and insightful resources for you to take a look if you're interested in this process. We published, Kevin and I authored an article for the Florida APA magazine, and that's the link shown there. The second one, we have a blog or blog post or RSA article written on Kittelson's website. And the last two resources are the over 300 pages of pictures and beautiful content summarized that from the field reviews and all the coordination, as well as an executive summary that gives you, you know, a 5-page brief snapshot of what the project entailed. And with that, we'll like to open the floor for questions. But before we run into the questions, Jen, are you able to run the poll, the last poll that we have for the session?
Yes, I
Awesome.
will run it right now.
Thank you.
Okay, Benazir and Kevin, thank you so much for a really engaging presentation. Just a couple of things I want to remind our audience that if you have questions, please type them into the chat and then we will ask them for you. Just also reminder of the objectives here, learn about applications for a new road safety audit specialized for areas near senior living facilities and gain an understanding of the types of interventions that create age-friendly streets. So a reminder that when you complete the evaluation form, which will be in the CVent platform, those are the learning objectives for this session. Just a couple of initial questions that have come up. Did you interview anyone that you observed crossing the streets or during your road audit? Did you have any personal interaction with those people?
That is a great question, and we didn't per se interview somebody that was crossing, but we definitely sometimes stopped and asked what lane uses or what was a destination that they were trying to access, but making either an unsafe maneuver or just crossing at an undesignated location. So we definitely took the opportunity to interact with the citizens in that facility or in that interaction. And then the second thing, we would always have people walk up to us and say, what are you guys doing? This problem is, or this issue in the road is causing us issues, blah, blah, blah. So there is definitely interaction between what the citizens, because we were wearing our personal protection gear, always with the safety vest. And that's also something to highly emphasize. Make sure you're visible on the road.
There's also, sorry. There's also an example by the Jasmine residence, which was on the construction at the time. I believe it's on 22nd Avenue, which is right across the street from a Publix, and Publix parking garage was a diagonal across from it. And the way that particular building was designed, you would figure that the front entrance to the building was at the intersection of 22nd Avenue, and I forgot the cross street because it had the nice round rotunda and so forth. You figured the grand entrance is where it was, but that's not where the entrance was. The entrance was off to the side south of it, which meant people leaving that facility, which is an older facility, they would go to the Publix and they would cross the street diagonally. The way it was set up is we saw people crossing diagonally across 22nd Avenue, which did not have a median. It did not, and there was high speeds on that road because they're not going to go back up to the intersection, across the street, and then come down. So that's one of the things we mentioned, that we saw that then to the foreman and so forth. Obviously, the plan has already been designed, but we figured that was something that they need to look into down the future. So that building has since been completed, and I haven't got a chance to go and look at it in person with all the COVID and such. But it'd be interesting to see if anything has been done on that now that the building is open.
Absolutely. Okay, and we have a question from Emily Hanna. Did you include seniors that are physically disabled or blind? I find that when doing audits that bringing a wheelchair, a white cane, or someone with a disability that can provide feedback is incredibly helpful.
So for the walk-in audits themselves, we did not include older adults to walk, because one, it was I want to say over 5 days of lengthy field reviews, but we did get their input and their just experience walking through the streets from the community or public involvement meetings. We did not take a wheelchair with us going through the roads, but we had our measuring wheels and kind of got a sense of how uncomfortable it could be for somebody with those conditions to be able to get from point A to point B. But that's a good recommendation. And that's where a multidisciplinary, diverse group really helps to put, all eyes on ground and get a really, you know, thorough review of the different elements within the roadway.
Great, thank you. And also from Tom Lanahan, did you find any transit stops that forced people to cross the street to change bus lines, for example?
I don't think I don't recall seeing any ones where they were forced once to cross, to change bus lanes, but there was one by the design of the street, that being Southwest 7th Street and Southwest 8th Street, because they're two one-way roads, very, like 4 or 5 lanes in either direction. The photos that you saw that we showed of Abuela, and also the lady crossing the stroller, those were individuals that were coming from the bus stop on Southwest 8th Street heading east. So when they would get off the bus, they would come up to 7th Street and that cross 7th Street to get to their neighborhood. And that was just by design because of the road being two one-way pairs. But obviously because of the way that's designed, those individuals, and it was a good amount of them we saw, were subject to having to cross that high-speed thoroughfare just to get back to the other side. So they weren't changing bus lane, they weren't changing buses per se, but they were just trying to get home.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Kevin. And how did you go about your outreach to get the people, the partners, the community members involved in your road safety audit?
So that was a time-consuming activity leading up to the field review efforts and the community meeting. So within each senior or assisted living facility, we reached out to representatives from City of Miami, Hialeah, enforcement. Enforcement is a big component to consider for road safety audits. And we made sure that either they attended, they participated in the field reviews, or they sent a representative from the agency to be able to help also on the implementation side. So a good example is the coordination with Miami-Dade County and DPW, where they had consistently sent 2 amazing staff engineers to walk along the corridors. And that coordination happened well in advance of going into the field. The same thing happened with FVOT, as one of the partners, or actually maintaining jurisdictions for several of the state roads going through the locations. And with the community itself for engagement, we basically shared an advertisement in English and Spanish, because that's another important piece. This was a Hispanic dominated community, and typically if they see flyers in English, they will not pay attention, but providing the communication in Spanish would definitely attracted a lot more audience, or a greater audience to the public meetings. And for the last session, the TPO actually brought some goodie bags with safety information, pamphlets, just general information that actually increased the attendance or the willingness to attend to the public meeting. And again, this was all pre-COVID-19 back in the summer of 2019. So definitely needs to be adjustment on how we continue conducting public meetings moving forward. But that's a little bit on background on how that community engagement and stakeholder involvement occurred.
Great, thank you. And just one more reminder, the session evaluation link is in the chat, and also you can use this link to vote for the People's Choice Award. I think we are about out of time. We do have a few more questions. I don't know how we're going to address those. I'm sorry, I need assistance from our coordinators on additional questions in the chat, or
We'll have everything recorded and saved, and we'll run it by your presenters here. There are opportunities to connect later in the day in the networking session. So hopefully you can all get together there and continue this conversation. We wish we could go a little bit longer to get everything answered, but it will be recorded, and that will be saved as well. So thank you.